This little child revealed to the nurses something horrifying about her mother after emerging from a 3-year coma. At 7 years old, Abby Peterson was an ordinary child who enjoyed playing outside. She enjoyed swinging around all day and climbing trees. She was quite the adventurer. She began to have headaches and nausea soon after her birthday. Her parents, George and Karen, initially assumed she was dehydrated from playing in the heat and gave her some over-the-counter medicine. Sadly, Abby's condition worsened quickly over the next 2 days, and she was taken to the hospital while sobbing and throwing up. Abby ended up staying longer in the hospital than anticipated on her initial visit. A little tumor in the brain was found after many scans, but due to the location's sensitivity, surgery was not an option. The poor little girl's health was becoming worse, and the doctors could not find a treatment. She was beginning to lose sensation in her legs at this point, and her speech was getting more slurred. Abby went into a coma without any apparent warning. George demanded the most medical attention possible. Even when a number of professionals arrived, the reason why this girl got so sick remained a mystery. Telling her parents that things were rapidly becoming worse was not easy. Abby appeared to be losing her mental capacity, and the majority of her organs needed to be hooked up to machines in order for her to survive. The doctors wanted to talk about the possibility of stopping the machines. They informed the parents that there was very little possibility Abby would awaken from her coma after she had been unconscious for a month. Even if she had, she most likely would have been in a vegetative condition with some sort of brain damage. It was time for George and Karen to give up on their lone kid. Hope persisted to some extent. George kept searching for information and physicians who might be able to assist. With the possibility of losing their kid, the family was going through a very trying moment. The once live Abby lay there hopelessly, hooked up to machines and monitors that beeped non-stop. She looked almost like a corpse. When Karen had to see her daughter, she experienced emotional distress and frequently started crying the instant she laid eyes on her. She went to see Abby every day at first, but after a few months of her being unconscious, her trips were fewer and further between. On the other hand, George kept coming every day. For at least an hour, he would spend time with Abby, telling her about his days, assuring her of his love, and perhaps reading her a favorite story. He informed physicians he felt he saw movement more than once, but they told him it was only an involuntary muscular spasm. George prayed and hoped, even after the doctors informed him that she would likely have the mental capacity of a 3-year-old if she woke up. He gave the medical team explicit instructions to contact him right away if Abby's health altered. Karen came to see Abby on the anniversary of her 1-year coma. George assured the physicians that there would always be hope for him, and that he would never contemplate shutting off the machines. However, under the stress of this load, Karen was beginning to experience mental distress and was become more erratic. Something snapped inside her as she sat there, still as ever, next to Abby's bed. She had been severely suppressing a torrent of emotions, and suddenly those feelings came out in words of hurt, disappointment, rage, and fury. Abby was informed by Karen that she could no longer stand to watch her laying there. By now, she had wanted to be well again, but it was obvious that this would not be possible. She confided in Abby that the length of time George spent in the hospital was negatively impacting their relationship. George was determined to spend every day with Abby, so they never had time to chat, enjoyed enjoyable activities together, or traveled. It was time for Abby to pass on, Karen informed her. She had a right to happiness once more, and she could not have it while Abby lay trapped between life and death. It was time for George and Karen to move on. After hearing what Karen and Abby were saying, one of the employees chose to let George know. The employee chose not to give him all the facts, since it was quite upsetting. George was informed by the medical personnel that Karen had said some distressing things and that they could see she wasn't feeling well. They recommended immediate mental health assistance. George first became enraged by what he heard and angrily confronted Karen on her behavior. Although he understood that she was suffering from a mental illness, he found it hard to forgive her for saying anything unfavorable about Abby. He would keep looking for novel ways to assist those in comas, since he wasn't ready to give up on his daughter. He informed Karen that he would only pardon her if she agreed to get psychological and/or therapeutic services. Things slightly improved after 3 months of therapy, and Karen and George resumed as much of a regular life as they could. George still went to the hospital on a regular basis, but no longer every day. Rather, he attended exclusively on Fridays and stayed by his daughter's side for 2 hours, continuing to tell her stories. What a terrible circumstance. But then a miracle occurred. One typical Tuesday afternoon, after nearly 3 years in a coma, George received a call from the hospital informing him that Abby had awakened. The nurse said that she had noticed the small girl's eyes moving while she was simply monitoring the monitors. She initially believed it to be simply muscular spasms until the girl attempted to open her mouth. She seemed to want to say something, but the nurse could not hear her. In an attempt to find out what Abby desired, Nurse Jillian put her ear next to her mouth. All Abby said was that she was really thirsty. After running to bring the girl some water, the nurse enthusiastically called out to someone in the corridor to hurry and get a doctor. Karen and George arrived to the hospital practically at the same time. For a little period, parents were permitted to glimpse their cherished daughter while the medical professionals conducted many tests to ascertain Abby's condition. During this crucial period of evaluation, the parents were permitted to wait outside the window, observing what the physicians were doing without interfering. The girl was questioned by the physicians about her memories. She informed them that for the previous 3 years, she had been aware of everything that had occurred around her. She could hear her parents talking, as well as the physicians. She also recalled how one of the women who cleaned the hospital room used to sing to herself while she worked. Abby had spent 3 years lying in a hospital bed, and during that time she had even learnt bits of her favorite song to sing. The physicians were astounded by what was happening. She was not able to speak effectively, but they could understand her. After answering more inquiries, Abby's expression darkened. A year after arriving at the hospital, she informed the physicians that her mother had told her that she wanted her to die. She was devastated by that. Karen burst into tears at that same moment. George lost his temper, but the doctors cautioned them from upsetting Abby anymore and against talking about it in front of her. He was aware that his wife had made certain statements, but he was unaware of the whole scope of her remarks up to that point. Although Karen expressed her regret to George, she also reminded him that she was not at all stable psychologically at the time, and that she would quickly retract her remarks if she could. The parents were eventually granted access to Abby's room after what seemed like an eternity. Karen was having trouble keeping her feelings in check. She apologized profusely to Abby for the hurtful remarks and said it was heartbreaking to watch her cherished daughter deteriorate and be confined to a bed with little chance of recovery. Then, in a desperate attempt to console her, she told her how much she loved her and promised to make up for the time she had missed and the hurtful things she had spoken. Without any delay, Karen left her work to fully focus on her daughter. Abby's physical recuperation was aided by the challenging year that ensued. She needed intensive physical and occupational therapy to help her walk and talk normally again because her body had very little muscle mass. She also had to overcome certain tremors and balance issues brought on by her neurological condition. Additionally, this was the period when the mother-daughter bond started to mend emotionally. The family bonds were reestablished once George realized that his wife had entirely forgiven him for the hurtful things she had spoken in front of their daughter. This Coma narrative is a compelling example of how intriguing the human mind can be. Seeing such a difficult narrative come to a satisfying conclusion gives me a lot of optimism. Kindly share your thoughts on this topic with us in the comments section below.